Anti-government forces in East Ukraine say they have shot down a tactical ballistic missile that was targeting the city of Lugansk. Workers at US refineries and chemical plants producing some 10% of the country's fuel, they go on strike over issues of pay, benefits and safety. And a Russian and an American have joined forces to set speed and distance records as they guide their hot air balloon over the vast Pacific Ocean. Just ticking over 12 o'clock noon here in Moscow. You're watching RT International with me, Rory Suchet. From all of us here, welcome to the programme. And straight to eastern Ukraine now, where anti-government forces have shelled an army convoy, forcing it to turn back as it was trying to reach troops concentrated in the town of Debaltsevo. Now, up to 10,000 government soldiers are now thought to be surrounded there. In recent days, the fiercest battles have raged for control of this strategically important hub that links the self-proclaimed republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. Meanwhile, anti-government forces in the Lugansk region say they have downed a short-range ballistic missile launched by Ukrainian forces. You can see behind me the debris being moved away by local fighters. They say the missile was fired towards the regional capital. The first reports of the army using this type of ballistic missile actually came out in July of last year. It's called a Tochka-U rocket, or what NATO calls an SS-21 Scarab. It's a powerful, short-range ballistic missile developed by the USSR back in the 1970s. It was initially designed to destroy targets like helicopter launch pads, ammunition depots and command posts. It has a maximum range of 120 kilometers, but it can reach up to speeds of 500 meters per second. The warhead alone can weigh almost 500 kilograms, and when it explodes, it can unleash 14,000 deadly fragments. For more on this, here's Roman Kosarev. He's in Donetsk.
When the anti-government forces in the east of Ukraine shot down the missile, the locals thought that a plane was shot because the explosion was so loud, and had the missile actually reached the city of Lugansk, the devastation would have been on a very grand scale. And SS-21 Scarab, that's the NATO classification of this ballistic missile, it's also able to carry a nuclear warhead, but of course that was not the case this time around. And the news of this SS-21 Scarab being used here in the east of Ukraine came in the summer, and actually I personally witnessed the results of the explosion when it hit the outskirts of Donetsk, and I was sitting in that crater, and certainly it was really devastating what we saw, as everything around me was completely destroyed.
Yeah, meanwhile, Russia has once again raised concerns over the escalation of violence in East Ukraine. Vladimir Putin appealing to all sides to try and show restraint. Now, Washington has also been calling for calm and diplomacy, but that's not stopped the White House from trying to shore up its moves against Moscow. In his budget proposal for next year, Barack Obama wants to spend $117 million to counter what he calls Russian aggression. Though there are some very mixed signals coming out of Washington, Guyane Chichikan investigates.
U.S. officials are putting out confusing statements, and messages seem to be changing by the hour. Monday morning, U.S. officials are considering arming Kyiv in the conflict in Ukraine. And by the evening, the White House says injecting more weapons into the conflict is not the answer. Are U.S. officials split on this, or are they testing public opinion? Why these confusing messages? I was at the State Department on Monday, and the spokeswoman was responding to questions about whether or not arming Kyiv would lead to escalation of the conflict. Take a listen.
Would such a decision violate the Minsk agreement and lead to escalation of the conflict?
Well, we haven't made the decision to do that, so I'm not going to speculate on that, and no.
The spokeswoman suggested that if the U.S. decides to arm Kyiv, it would not be a violation of Minsk agreements, because technically the U.S. is not signatory to the agreements. The administration might be preparing the public for such a decision. Now, President Obama's budget announcement on Monday also led to confusion.
It supports our troops and strengthens our border security. And it gives us the resources to confront global challenges, from ISIL to Russian aggression.
I asked the State Department spokesperson how exactly Washington is planning to confront Russia. And she responded that the U.S. is not confronting Russia, that confronting Russian aggression is not the same as confronting Russia. That is a distinction that was lost in President Obama's speech. So many Americans who watched his budget announcement might actually start thinking that the U.S. is in conflict with Russia. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Shagyan, RT.
And anti-war activist Richard Becker, he thinks Washington doesn't actually feel at all restricted by any agreements that are made when it comes to dealing with Ukraine.
The United States government acts in many ways like the Ukraine is its 51st state, even though it's halfway around the world. But, you know, when we look at agreements, since the beginning of the history of the United States, since the United States was a country, there have been so many broken agreements and broken treaties and agreements interpreted in such a way that allows the U.S. government to proceed in the way that it wants to at any particular moment, regardless of what the provisions were of those agreements. And certainly the idea that the United States will now militarily intervene by supplying weapons to the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian army can't be interpreted in any other way except as a violation of that agreement, of the Minsk agreement.
We will continue bringing you the very latest from Ukraine on air and online. Of course, you can always head over to RT.com for the very latest updates and analysis.
Right from the scene. First-rate news and eye-gripping pictures. On our reporters' Twitter and Instagram. To be in the know, follow us online.
It's good to have you with us today here on RT International. To Greece now, where the new leaders are on a tour across Europe to try and gain support for a renegotiation of the country's enormous debt. One of the main campaign promises that did bring Syriza to power. The Greek Prime Minister's next stop will be Rome, where he's set to meet Italy's head of government later today. Syriza's win has fueled anti-austerity anger across the EU. Italy's anti-Euro five-star movement hailing the party's victory as if it were its own. And Spain's left-wing Podemos celebrating the wind of change blowing across the EU. And the French Left Party proclaimed an end to the era of the all-powerful arrogance of neoliberals in Europe. Tim Jones from the Jubilee Debt Campaign told RT UK that indeed some of Greece's debt should be written off.
I think the Greek government have been quite clear on that. They don't want more loans. They want to stop this addiction of constant recycling of loans. But what is wanted instead is to get the debt down to a manageable level through cancelling it and then allowing Greece to prosper after that. To be a substantial debt reduction, both in terms of justice, because it's not the Greek people who benefited from the bailouts, and the simple morality of the poverty that people are suffering from in Greece. That a quarter of people are now living in poverty. It's 50% youth unemployment. But also this is about getting the European economy going again. The good of hope of the economic recovery across Europe, we need solution both for Greece but also for Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and to do that in a collective way that brings us all closer together.